Nature is one of our most valuable resources and one we're depleting fast. As our scientific understanding of complex ecosystem grows, so does the technology we need to restore them. But we're still missing one crucial part of the equation: money. A new financial mechanism, biodiversity credits, now promises to create the economic incentives that can put us on the path towards reversing ecological damage. But how do we put a price tag on nature? And can restoring ecosystems become a viable investment rather than just corporate charity? I'm Tomasz Koper, and this is Connected on TaiwanPlus. To explain this emerging environmental finance tool, we're joined from Washington, D.C. by Ryan Sarsfield, Senior Advisor for Biodiversity Markets at the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, or EPIC. Ryan, can you tell us what EPIC does and how does your work relate to these financial environmental efforts?
Sure, glad to be with you. The Environmental Policy Innovation Center, EPIC, we work on a few areas across water quality, technology, how we can use tech to better improve environmental progress, and restoration, which is what I focus on. And what we're trying to do is figure out new ways to do things, test them out, share lessons learned, and above all else, do it faster. We think that these are really priority issues and we can find new ways to do things and build on the successes we've made so far.
Well, one of the tools that you are focusing on is biodiversity credits. So for viewers unfamiliar with the concept, how do biodiversity credits work and who creates, who sells them, who buys them?
It's a concept of taking the kind of work we do that we've long done. Humans have done this for a very long time of protecting ecosystems and restoring ecosystems. Use a methodology to ensure that we're creating something to a known standard at the very least, and make sure it's high quality. So we have integrity standards that we want to uphold and create a trustworthy thing that we can actually sell to others who want to buy it. Now, who creates these? They can be private sector investors that support developers that go out into areas where they work. They might acquire some land, they will restore it or preserve it. And from that, using this methodology, we can create credits of a known methodology that help us to say, this is what was done here, this is the before, the baseline, this is the after, and we know that this will be protected for the long term. Those can then be sold to primarily private sector companies who want to invest in nature. Others might buy it. We have similar things in both the regulatory space here in the United States, where we have markets that require offsets. We don't usually call them biodiversity credits, but it's the same idea. Companies buy those when they're developing on land, or they might be disturbing a wetland. And also states might buy these. States or other government entities, when they build a highway, when they impact nature, they may want to and may need to buy credits, and we can sell them into those markets.
Unlike what we see in the carbon markets, there are different standards for different ecosystems when biodiversity credits are created. Is this lack of standardization a problem?
I don't think it's a problem, and we have a track record of having successful biodiversity markets that show that it's not a problem, but it's an understandable comparison. Carbon markets, in principle, can be one global market. We have one atmosphere. That's why that's such a uniquely shared problem. A carbon credit in one part of the world would be potentially, ideally similar to a carbon credit in another part of the world, and then it can use the same methodology. They don't always. But with biodiversity, it's different every place you go, not just the types of ecosystem, whether it's a desert or an alpine forest or tundra or a mangrove system, but mangroves in different parts of the world have different species in them. So if we want to measure them well, as a local ecologist might understand, be able to interpret, we can't do that in a way that is exactly consistent from place to place. And that's okay. After all, the way that local impacts are affecting both ecosystem services, the intrinsic value of nature, is also local.
Well, diversity of ecosystems is certainly a great thing for us here in Taiwan with such a wide variety. And so, with no single global standard for biodiversity credits, Taiwan is developing its own approach. We spoke with Professor Tsai Ming-Jer, director of the National Taiwan University Experimental Forest, about why that institution is uniquely positioned to develop Taiwan's first biodiversity credit scheme, BioPlus. Take a listen.
台大实验林隶属于台湾大学啊，那实验林是在这个台湾的中部，都在南投。那从水里乡那边大概是海平面200公尺到玉山顶3952公尺哈。那这个是一个非常高的落差哈，横跨的5个气候区，从亚热带到寒带。那因为有这么大的高差，差3700公尺，所以它的植物相、动物相都非常非常的丰富，有很丰富的这个生物多样性。那我们台大森林的面积呢，大概有32000多公顷，占台湾大约1%，它就是一个台湾森林的一个缩影哈。我们从1902年开始哈，就已经建立了台大演习林，那是日据时代。那我们已经超过了120年的一个生态的数据，因为我们有这么多的一个累积的数据的时候，我们就不用去猜测50年前大概是什么样子，那我们也可以预测未来100年可能是什么样子哈。如果再加上一些气候变迁的因素的话，所以我们可以将历史的这个生物的数据哈，转化为现代可以验证的未来的金融的指标。
So, Ryan, Professor Tsai there mentions this trove of ecological data going back a century and providing a certain baseline. How helpful is looking at historical data and also comparing ecosystems that obviously are not the same and they will differ greatly across locations? But with, are there any valid or useful comparisons that we can make between ecosystems, for example, when it comes to establishing certain benchmark or standards?
I think it's fantastic. The power of having this much ecological knowledge, all of this work ultimately is built on the work of ecologists and natural historians, both traditional ecological knowledge and formal academic work. This is how we know what exists in the ecosystem, the tree species, the fungal species, the animals, the ecological interactions. And knowing this across such a huge timeline, a century, and across an altitudinal gradient is incredibly powerful. As climate changes, we need to know how species will migrate, where they can migrate. And when you have an altitudinal gradient, it's like moving north or south in a sense, right? So as the climate changes in Taiwan, like everywhere else, the research across these different gradients will be extremely helpful. The other thing I think that illustrates well is how much we need to keep in mind the changes from one altitude to another, from one mountain range to another. This is, after all, why biodiversity and measurement needs to be focused very locally, because you have differences across, you might go a few hundred meters higher and the species you find there are quite different. So when you think about impacting one, you can't necessarily replace that with something from 2 mountain ranges over or, 1,000 meters further up the mountain, because they're different areas with different species that need to be managed differently.
Carbon markets and carbon credits have faced significant criticism for greenwashing. Buy a few credits and your emission sins will be forgiven. And some worry that with biodiversity credits, it will open doors for companies to pay to destroy. What can we do to prevent that and actually have them use the way they were designed to?
I understand the critique. There's been some very bad carbon projects. There's also been a lot of excellent carbon projects. There's a lot of resistance to the idea of offsets, in part because it assumes that the alternative would be that we would protect everything all the time. And obviously we don't. So the challenge there is, what is the baseline that we're working with, whether we're talking about climate change or we're talking about biodiversity conservation? What we can do is to have good standards. So if we want confidence in these markets, we have to uphold those integrity principles. We know how to do it. And then to the idea of ensuring that these are not considered indulgences, we have to look at what is the baseline in Taiwan and every other country. How much ecosystem damage already takes place and how much of it is offset now. And in most places, the answer is very little, if any. If there is impact to an ecosystem, And after all, the building I'm sitting in, where you are, where our agriculture is based, everything impacts ecosystems. We have to incorporate that and the costs and benefits. And the way we do that is by putting a price on that damage and treating it like it is and should be costly. And that's how we ensure that we don't destroy ecosystems without thinking twice. And when there is a price, this helps us discourage the impact in the first place. So we can channel funding with an offset into good projects that create better restoration, more conservation, and at the same time, we discourage the impact in the first place. And this is quite different from the idea that, you can just pay and destroy and off you go. We will protect, as we always have, really critical ecosystems and endangered species. Some areas absolutely should be off limits. But for the rest, we have to very carefully make those decisions and incorporate the costs, because if we don't, we'll just continuously lose more and more ecosystems, which is, I would argue, the status quo for much of the world.